In addition to the ongoing proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, growing tension in the Middle East, and continued U.S. provocations and military buildup in the Asia-Pacific region, I have been recently keeping track of these protests in Georgia, which shares part of its border with the Russian Federation, has had a troubled recent history with the Russian Federation, and this is all because it has been interfered in, politically captured by the United States, and used as a proxy against Russia. And right now, certain parts of the Georgian government are attempting to pass a law to rein in U.S. interference within their internal political affairs, to protect their political independence. And I've written an article about this for New Eastern Outlook. The link will be posted in the video description below, along with all the sources that I cite in the article. I'm going to read that article to you in case you don't feel like reading it yourself. And as always, I will provide additional context and information when and if necessary. Title of the article is "The War Against U.S. Subversion: How Nations Are Fighting Back from Georgia to Thailand." Thailand, where I am based, went through a very similar process. They failed to pass their draft NGO law, which was supposed to rein in all these U.S. government-funded fronts that are being used to divide and destroy the country, still to this day. Let me begin. I'll get into all of that here in just a moment. Throughout the 21st century, the United States has invaded and occupied multiple nations, including Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003, and Syria in 2014. It has also led military interventions, rendering once prosperous nations into failed states, including Libya from 2011 onward. Beyond this more destructive and direct approach, the U.S. has also admittedly interfered in the internal political affairs of other nations, attempting to overthrow elected governments and install client regimes in their place. This is something the U.S. always accuses others, like Russia and China, of doing when the U.S. itself is openly doing it. In reality, while they accuse their adversaries of doing in complete fiction. In a 2004 Guardian article titled "U.S. Campaign Behind the Turmoil in Kiev," remember, the protests in Ukraine in 2014, that was the final and successful political attempt to politically capture Ukraine. There was an attempt before that in 2004. Very similar, but it simply failed. And this is the article that I'm referring to from The Guardian, 2004. The link will be in the video description below. And it admits in great detail how from top to bottom, the protests in Ukraine in 2004 were funded and directed by the US government. It admits it in the article in detail. It says the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years, so it wasn't just Ukraine in 2004, it was 3 other countries over the course of 4 years in total, has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. So the Guardian is admitting the US is behind all of this, but they're trying to spin it as if U.S. interference and regime change is somehow a good thing because these are bad governments. The U.S. doesn't like them. They've decided that they're bad. So it's good that the U.S. is getting rid of them through political interference and contravention of international law. The Guardian article continues. It says, funded and organized by the U.S. government, deploying U.S. consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, the 2 big American parties, and U.S. non-government organizations. That is a misnomer. If you're funded by the US government, how can you be a non-governmental organization? The campaign was first used in Europe, in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. Richard Miles, the US ambassador in Belgrade, played a key role. And by last year, as U.S. ambassador in Tbilisi, he repeated the trick in Georgia, coaching Mikhail Saakashvili in how to bring down his opponent. 10 months after the success in Belgrade, the U.S. ambassador in Minsk, Michael Kozak, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, so not just in Eastern Europe, all around the globe, and they say notably in Nicaragua, organized a near identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hardman Alexander Lukashenko, and they admit that did not work out. The campaign in Georgia was a success. The US government toppled the elected government, installed the client regime. From that point onward, from 2003 onward, they began the same process that they have done in Ukraine from 2014 onward, militarizing Georgia, US, NATO troops coming in, arming them, training them, and then encouraging them to start a war with Russia. You may remember this. And as I pointed out many times before, this article from Reuters in 2009, Georgia started war with Russia, EU-backed report. And this article is all about how the EU investigated the supposed Russian attack on Georgia in 2008. And it turns out that it was actually Georgia who provoked it, and Russia simply reacted. Keep that in mind, because the US did that in Georgia, overthrew the government, put a client regime in place, militarized Georgia, used it as a battering ram against Russia, and actually carried out a military attack on Russia, on Russian troops. And then they were doing the same exact thing from 2014 onward in Ukraine, but just on a much more massive and more dangerous scale. Russia decided to strike first with this special military operation in February 2022 before funding the supply of arms and training continue to any greater extent. Let me continue with my article here. This startling admission exposes the US government as deeply involved in interfering in and subverting the political independence of not one, but multiple nations in Eastern Europe. The same article admits that the US government achieves this through funds distributed by the National Endowment for Democracy's many subsidiaries, including the International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute, and Freedom House. It doesn't mention the NED by name, but if you go to the websites of all these organizations, they admit they're subsidiaries of the NED. It also mentions adjacent private foundations like George Soros's Open Society Foundation. The admitted interference aimed at regime change and the political capture of targeted nations were roles reversed, and it was the US or its allies targeted by such interference by, say, Russia or China, would elicit an immediate and severe response. Already, the collective West possesses some of the strictest laws regarding foreign interference. The United States maintains the Foreign Agents Registration Act, often referred to as FARA, established all the way back in 1938, requiring foreign-funded organizations to register with the US government and disclose their funding or face severe penalties, including lengthy jail terms. It is no surprise that many other nations around the globe have adopted similar legislation. After all, a nation's political independence is guaranteed under the United Nations Charter, as is a nation's right to defend it. Other nations who have failed to pass such legislation and have found themselves overwhelmed by US and European funded organizations and opposition groups who are able to block or push agendas, including legislation suiting Western interests at the explicit expense of targeted nations. The temptation of these nations to pass long overdue legislation to put in check Western interference the West itself would never tolerate within its own borders is high, and several nations have attempted to do so in recent years, including Georgia right now. The Caucasus nation of Georgia is now in Western headlines for trying to do exactly this, having already suffered immensely from both US and European interference, but also political capture and use by the West in a disastrous but short proxy war with neighboring Russia. I was just talking about that in 2008. Some in the capital of Tbilisi are eager to finally close loopholes that have allowed foreign-funded subversion to flourish. CNN in its recent article, this is the article right here. Georgia presses on with Putin-style foreign agent bill despite huge protests. Now, look at the protests, look at the EU flags, and just recall that The Guardian admitted in 2004 that the US government controls these opposition groups and used them to overthrow the elected Georgian government in 2003. These are the exact same mobs. They are the same mobs, just many years later, still completely funded and organized by the US government. The title of the CNN article, Georgia presses on with Putin-style foreign agent bill despite huge protests. The Georgian government has pointed out, as has Russia when they passed their foreign agents law, that their legislation is a mirror of the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act. It is literally the same legislation, but the CNN is not ever going to mention that. It ironically attempts to conflate Georgia's legitimate desire to root out foreign interference with a nebulous inference of Russian interference instead. Nowhere is it mentioned that these huge protests are led by U.S. government-funded opposition figures. The article claims that Georgia's law mirrors Russia's own foreign agents law, failing to point out that both pieces of legislation closely mirror the United States' own Foreign Agents Registration Act. Other articles, this one right here, far from FARA, Georgia's foreign agent law controversy. So the Georgian government is saying that their legislation mirrors the U.S. FARA, Foreign Agents Registration Act. Here is Eurasianet, and we'll get into who they are in just a moment. This is them trying to dispute that when it is indisputable that that is what this legislation is and how badly needed it is, considering the fact that the U.S. is mobilizing all of these forces that it controls within Georgian political space. How badly needed this legislation actually is. So this article from Eurasianet attempts to claim Georgia's bill is different from the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act, claiming that, this is a quote, "One crucial difference is that FARA does not require registration simply on grounds of foreign funding. Rather, one must be an agent of a foreign principal, including if one acts at the direction and control of a foreign government." It also says, while the U.S. law focuses on political lobbying, the Georgia law will primarily affect the nation's vibrant civil society that donors have nurtured for decades. But remember, the Guardian's 2004 article admitted the supposed civil society the U.S. government and others are nurturing in targeted nations, including Georgia, are involved specifically in regime change, funded and organized by the U.S. government. That is a direct quote from the 2004 Guardian article. They say, the protests were being funded and organized by the U.S. government, amounting to foreign interference, even by the U.S.'s own definition. It should be pointed out that Eurasianet itself is funded by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy. Who's surprised by that? This is their About webpage. They claim that they're an independent news organization, and yet they're funded by the U.S. government. The British Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Here's the National Endowment for Democracy. Here's George Soros's Open Society Foundation. Here is U.S. tech giant, U.S.-based tech giant Google. And so it is not independent. It is a propaganda outlet created, funded, directed by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy and adjacent funds and foundations. In fact, the vast majority of the political opposition groups inside Georgia and media organizations beyond Georgia's borders criticizing the legislation are funded by the U.S. government. They're opposed to Georgia's foreign agent bill, not because it will encroach upon actual freedom and democracy, and specifically Georgia's own self-determination, but precisely because it will create a significant obstacle for U.S. interference. That is the bottom line. The growing domestic pressure placed on Georgia's government is an illustration of just how much control over Georgia's internal political affairs the U.S. has, and how urgent it is to pass legislation that will expose and eliminate such interference. Now let's talk about Thailand, who just a few years ago attempted to do the same thing, and unfortunately, for the time being, has failed. Other nations have gone through a similar process. Russia successfully reduced foreign interference in its political space with its own foreign agents law. Again, it was based entirely on the Foreign Agents Registration Act of the United States. The Southeast Asian Kingdom of Thailand attempted to pass a similar law in 2021. Actually, it spanned a couple of years. They had talked about it, proposed it, and it lingered for a while, and then it was finally abandoned. Just as the U.S. is doing now in regards to Georgia, it mobilized U.S.-funded opposition groups and media platforms inside Thailand and media and rights organizations beyond Thai borders to place pressure on the Thai government to abandon the legislation and preserve a permissive environment for foreign interference. This article by Thai PBS, which is Thai state-funded media, but with a catch. This was from 2021. Thailand's NGO law uprooting foreign influence or gagging government critics. And ultimately, the article is making an argument. This is government-funded media making the argument against the government-proposed legislation. And here's a photo, a very interesting photo. iLaw rallied to submit signatures of charter changes, supporters at the Parliament House in September 22nd, 2020. And if you go to iLaw's official website and you scroll down, you will see the National Endowment for Democracy. The US government funds them. And what were they doing? They were petitioning to rewrite Thailand's entire constitution. A US government-funded front was trying to rewrite Thailand's entire constitution. Just think about how dangerous and unacceptable that is. And that was the type of foreign interference Thailand was trying to rein in with its NGO law. So a 2021 Thai PBS article titled "Thailand's NGO Law Uprooting Foreign Influence or Gagging Government Critics" would include a photo of a rally led by a U.S. government-funded organization called iLaw and cites criticism regarding its U.S. government funding. And they tried to make the criticism of iLaw sound paranoid, when in reality, if anything, it was understated. The organization was attempting to petition for a complete rewrite of Thailand's constitution. Despite the obvious gravity of a foreign-funded organization attempting to rewrite Thailand's most central and sensitive document, Thai PBS attempted to brush off the concern behind the NGO law as paranoia. Thai PBS, despite being funded by the Thai government itself, has a disproportionate number of employees educated in and sympathetic to the US and Europe. In other words, they go overseas to the US, to Europe, to study in university, and then they come back completely indoctrinated and eagerly serving Western interests at the expense of Thai interests. Many employees are drawn from or move on to the Western media or organizations funded by the US government. I cannot mention names because despite these people always screaming about freedom of speech and freedom of expression, if you mention their name and you point out how they hopped from Thai PBS to an NED-funded front to the BBC, they will try to drag you to court and ruin your life with litigation. They have endless resources to do this with. It is another illustration of just how dangerous foreign interference actually is and how far off course it can push a nation from protecting its own best interests, including its own sovereignty and political independence. Another organization, Fortify Rights, which was created and run by white Americans, has nothing to do with Thailand or Southeast Asia where it operates and interferes in. It published an article in 2022 titled "Fortify Rights Submits Concerns to Thai Government Over Draft NGO Law." That is this one right here. And again, they're showing pictures of these US-backed mobs that were in the streets in Thailand trying to divide and destroy the country, just like the US has done to so many other countries around the world. And they're making all the same arguments that Thai PBS made, that, as I will reveal and explain, that the US State Department itself made, at least in regards to this current situation in Georgia. Just as in the case with Eurasianet, Fortify Rights is likewise funded by the US government through the NED, as documented in the organization's own 2015 annual report. I will include the link to that in the video description below. Here it is. Right down here, our supporters, National Endowment for Democracy. Also, Open Society Foundations, also several other Western governments. And I remember confronting the founder of this organization, this white American man, and he swore up and down that he wasn't funded by the US government. He claimed that even though the National Endowment for Democracy receives all of its money from the US government, once it's transferred to the NED and then transferred to him, it's no longer US government money. It's literally the definition of laundering money, concealing the source of your funds. He's getting his funding ultimately from the US government, and he's attempting to conceal it by using the NED as an intermediary. This letter by Fortify Rights echoed Thai PBS's argument, which uncoincidentally is the same argument made by the US State Department itself in regards to Georgia's current legislation. So let's take a look at that. Then US State Department spokesman Ned Price on foreign agents law. This was March 2023. And so it's an excerpt from a department press briefing, and journalists were asking him about the foreign agent law, and he was making all the exact same arguments that Thai PBS was making regarding the Thai law, and Fortify Rights was also making in their letter regarding the Thai law. So it's the same argument used over and over against any country that tries to defend itself against US interference. The State Department is ultimately the one making this argument because it is funding all of these fronts in these targeted countries. They are just simply repeating and amplifying these points. A March 2023 post on the U.S. Embassy in Georgia's website quotes then U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price, making all the same arguments seen across the Western media and U.S.-funded organizations in both Georgia and Thailand, past and present, regarding their respective foreign interference laws. Price makes the claim that the U.S. Foreign Agents Registration Act only concerns agents of other governments, while claiming U.S. and European-funded organizations and individuals are not somehow being directed by Washington or Brussels. And if you confront any National Endowment for Democracy-funded organization here in Thailand or anywhere else, they will always claim that while they receive U.S. government funding, they are not cooperating with the U.S. government itself. And we know that that's not true because there are numerous leaked videos and audio calls between the NED and the organizations that they're funding, and all they do is quietly coordinate and conspire against these targeted nations.
As I know, net is prohibited in Russia now.
Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. You know, we don't have offices. We're not like Freedom House or NDI and IRI. We don't have offices. So if we're not there, they can't kick us out. But we support many groups, and we have a very active program throughout the country. And you know, many of the groups obviously have their partners in exile. So we're very active, and we can be very helpful on this issue.
It's the very definition of foreign interference. While Price, Eurasianet, Thai PBS, and Fortify Rights all tried to portray laws confronting foreign interference as a threat to democracy and human rights, a nation's ability to determine its political matters itself without external interference is one of the most important human rights of all. The foundation of genuine human freedom is self-determination. And when the U.S. is funding groups inside a targeted country, pushing agendas that have been determined in Washington, not by those people in the country itself, that is the complete undermining of human freedom, not upholding it. For Thailand, the collective pressure of US-funded groups inside Thai borders and beyond them succeeded in forcing the Thai government at the time to abandon the NGO law. US and European-funded opposition groups continue unchecked interference in Thailand's internal political affairs to this day, as well as interfering in and undermining the integrity of Thailand's institutions, including its legal and education system. Just to name a few. It is a cancer spreading like wildfire, and it is consuming an entire generation, and it will have ramifications years into the future, even if it is ever successfully dealt with eventually. Washington and its proxies' attempts to vilify a nation for protecting its freedom to decide its internal political affairs itself, including how it decides to protect its political independence, is itself evidence of just how extensive and dangerous US interference is abroad and how important it is for nations to defend against it with foreign agent bills and foreign-funded NGO laws. Only time will tell whether or not Georgia is able to both pass this legislation and successfully implement it. That is the most important part, implementing it, restoring national sovereignty and political independence stripped from it by US interference and political capture. Should Georgia succeed where Thailand failed, perhaps it will encourage other nations to follow suit, including nations that have already tried but failed to do so in recent years, including Thailand. That is the great hope, that a new international norm is formed by nations like Georgia, and of course Russia, who has already successfully done this, China, of course, where they do deal with this interference and remove it from within their sovereign political space, their media space, their information space, their education space, and genuine sovereignty, genuine self-determination can finally prevail. That is one of the cornerstones of the emerging multipolar world. And if one or two nations are successful, others follow. Eventually, other nations that have tried and failed, they can try again and hopefully succeed. And we can create a trend, a momentum against this monumental US interference. And I often hear people say, Brian, you think the NED, the US government and the NED is everywhere. They're everywhere. You think they're everywhere in interfering in everything. But if you just go to the NED's own official website, you can see a global map where they are literally interfering everywhere, except of course in places that are either the United States or as good as a 51st state of the United States. And so you have Latin America and Caribbean, Central and Eastern Europe, Middle East and Northern Africa, of course Africa, Eurasia, Asia, of course China. You know, if you go through the list, if you go to say Asia, you'll see that Asia itself is broken down into multiple regions, and China has at least several categories dedicated to just US interference in China itself, including Taiwan and Hong Kong. So they really are interfering absolutely everywhere, and the emerging multipolar world, this has to be a priority, confronting, exposing, and eliminating this foreign interference. It is the only way a nation can truly be free and can truly pursue self-determination. So, you know, something the US claims to uphold worldwide, yet is the most egregious violator of a nation's right to self-determination, any targeted nation's right to self-determination. So I have done many videos about the National Endowment for Democracy. If you go to my YouTube channel, for example, and here along these tabs, there's this magnifying glass. If you click on that and you just type in National Endowment for Democracy and click enter, you're going to see all the videos over many years where I go through in-depth US interference in nations all around the globe, and especially here in Southeast Asia where I'm based. This is the whole reason I got involved in geopolitics. The general public's awareness of US interference is next to zero, and I've worked hard to try to raise awareness of that. So if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. On Telegram especially, I post absolutely everything, including entire backups of all of my videos. I post everything there, including articles that are now being censored, even on X, formerly Twitter. So please, if you can, sign up and follow me on Telegram. There's many other great accounts there on Telegram, including the Duran, which posts daily videos of both Alex and Alexander, Alex Christopher and Alexander Mercouris. Great updates daily by both of them. Check the video description for all of the links that I referenced, including the article that I read, that I wrote for New Eastern Outlook. Also in the video description are ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my other social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not doing me any good. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon. To everyone who has been supporting my work, whether it's one-time donations, donations month to month, or if you have no funds to spare and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. That all helps me continue doing this work. So thank you for that, and thank you, as always, for watching.